Hello, and thank you for joining us today at Finding the Healer Within. We hope this recording finds you in an abundance of grace and ease. This podcast works as a resource for all who seek connection to their ancestral roots by connecting you with a variety of curanderos, teachers, guides, and facilitators of healing. Hello, and thank you for joining us here at Finding the Healer Within. Today we're going to be speaking with Laura from Yanawana, Somisek territory. How are you today, Laura?
Qualitla Nestle, I'm doing well, just enjoying this winter break.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so during this winter break, is this like your time for vacation, like usually in the year, or is it just kind of time to reset for you?
Usually it's kind of weird. We kind of laugh at ourselves because we're just like, man, why can't we just be normal? Because most of the times when we have like vacation times, especially like, these vacation times that are like, 2-3 weeks, or like the summer, where, we have a long stretch where our kids are out of school. And, my dualidad, he's a teacher. So we get like all the, school breaks and stuff. And we usually end up doing some kind of ceremony, where we're in like remote areas, there's no bathroom, and we're like roughing the elements, so we're just like, that's our idea of a vacation,
Yeah.
is to go pray and make offerings. But we try to balance it out too, because we have small children, or growing children, I guess, like we have a 10-year-old, and we have a soon to be 13-year-old, so that's a significant age in our traditions, for coming of age and rites of passage. So we have a 13-year-old. So we always trying to balance out like, ceremony and our compromiso as like, culture keepers and tradition keepers, ceremony folk, and then also do something fun with the kids, So when we're in Mexico City, which is just where we got back from, Tenochtitlan, did our Panquetzalitzli ceremony for the winter solstice. And then we went back into the city and did, city stuff, shopping, and, getting things that, we can't get here, like
Yeah.
arco, and just different, tools that we use in our ceremonies, like, salmadores and stuff, like that, to share with the community. And then with, family stuff, like, visiting family for the holidays, our families, still observe like, like Christmas and the Gregorian calendar, New Year and all that stuff. So we spent time with them, and did some lucha libre, and, just other things that are part of our family's traditions that are not necessarily like ceremony either. Like my husband and I, like we both come from families that really like valued lucha libre. So we take our kids to lucha libre. Like we almost weren't going to go this year because we didn't find anything, but they ended up having like a special like Christmas Day kind of thing, and so we went to that, and it was pretty epic.
That's awesome. Yeah, because that's also like a really interesting tradition in Mexico, because it's different from the wrestling here. It's like it's really interesting to see, and like for your kids to be able to celebrate that part of of their culture, and like really get to know themselves is something that hasn't always been allowed. But how is it that you got into, like, if you can give us some insight into what led you to the beautiful work that you do with uniting community together to heal from colonization and other things like that?
No, thank you. Yeah, I kind of grew up with it, like in subtle ways, like, and that's another reason why sometimes too, like I've had to like readjust, and have been invited, from other friends and stuff to, to be more intentional with how I talk about these journeys for myself and the community that works alongside me, and that I get to support, like, we like there was definitely a time in my journey where we were used words like decolonizing or, reclaiming or reconnecting and things like that, and and then I had a conversation with one of my friends, Emmy Aguilar, who's Coahuiltecan, and they run indigenized arts education account and stuff. So they're really smart and just very like beautiful, like lens on how we retribalize ourselves after like losing connection with our tribal like lands, our tribal people. And she's like, well, you're not really reconnecting, like it's always been there, like in the form of like the way that my abuelita would do the limpias on us, or how I would get, curada from empacho or from, like an earache with the newspaper and things like that, so different practices. So I feel like in that way, we're more like
Yeah.
rekindling, like, it's like it's a fire that's always been lit and that our ancestors like kept lit in
Yeah.
modified ways, that were just hidden, through like our tés and our hierbas and our food and our costumbres, our values, our the mannerisms, of respect that we have like intergenerationally, the matriarchal leadership, in our families, which I feel like that's always been present. And and on my mom's side of the family, like more like specifically, like I'm a third generation dancer, like I grew up doing danza to the Virgen de Guadalupe, through matachin danza, which is a missionized dance, like it is, a dance that, people in northern parts of Mexico do.
Oh, it is definitely a flame that's always been there that I just needed to rekindle and like breathe life into. And I think
Mhm,
that's, I was reading one of your essays, the one, The Breath of Life, which
mhm,
I found so powerful. Like it really resonated with me, like with, you almost drowning at one point in your life and not being able to catch your breath. And, but can you tell us a little bit more about that particular essay and what kind of drove you to write these things?
Yeah, thank you so much for, calling in like the actual land, through through the adobe, because I feel like, I always grew up hearing stories about, adobe and like, I mean, I went to Mexico all the time, like some of actually one of the colonias that my grandparents ended up like living in right before, they passed. Like I mean, my grandpa, on this is on my dad's side of the family, like, so, you asked about the the blog, the journal entry that I was able to publish through the National Folklife Network, around the connection to, the adobe and the, just the way in which land, um, and and like our lineage are connected, especially, when we've migrated away from our ancestral lands, and for my dad's side of the family, they were from El Salto Durango, which is in Tepehuan territory. So I heard you say you were Yaqui, so I'm like, you know we're on the opposite side of the sierra of the Yaqui, and so, my dad and, my uncles that still lived in El Salto before they moved further down to Lerdo Durango, they, they always talked about, being around the adobe and building stuff with adobe, like even as kids, like, playing around while the adults were making things and, making walls of adobe and like, and then tearing them down at the end of the day, and so like that in the conversations with my dad when he was still alive, he would jokingly say, like, whenever I'd be like, overwhelmed with my kids, I'm just like, oh my God, they just have so much energy, and he's like, pues ponlos a hacer adobes, because we were, in the process of receiving our, our permisos from our elders in central Mexico, and in, the deserts of San Luis Potosi, to be able to run sweat lodges, right? Like, we've been doing a lot of traditional healing work through the danza and through like different medicines, and the temazcal, or the sweat lodge, has always been a very key component of that healing process. For myself and for a lot of the folks that I'm in community and ceremony community with, and even beyond, because we have an extensive amount of relatives that have sweat lodges in their homes, and we're able to bring folks from our community there to heal, like the way that we use the temazcal is for healing, but there's also like all these other ways to use it too that were traditional to Anahuaca traditions, that we're learning, or rekindling our connection to. And so we did a whole like I received a little bit of funding, and we did some fundraising, some grassroots fundraising as a community ourselves, to be able to go to Mexico and get to meet different communities that were within our conformidad, is what we call it, right, in the danza. Like our conformidades are like, people that have their groups that are not necessarily part of our calpuli, but they have a good kinship. They have a good kinship to our to our clan. And so, we went and learned about the different types of temazcales, which are a little bit different than like the inipi sweats that a lot of people see here, in what's now the north, of the continent.
Oh.
So they're made out of adobe, and or brick, and things like that. So they're more like permanent structures, and a lot of them have the horno, or like the where the fire goes outside of it, so it's actually heating up from the surface of the building itself, rather than like the hot stones that are in the middle of the sweat. So we've been learning and navigating that, and trying to build our temazcal here. It's still like right now we're in like a transitional like upgrade phase. So our next journey here is to get started on the permanent structure, after running like a temporary like wooden and uh, like lona, like how do you say lona, tarps, like on the sweat. So that that's been a is just the healing that I received myself from the sweats, and then also now having that permiso from our elders to run our own sweats for our families and our close community, and yeah, just continue that cycle of maintaining those practices for the betterment of our lives and our communities. But yeah, you can read all about that on this article that I got to write.
That's awesome. Yeah, and if anybody can read it, if they go to that website that's at the bottom, and for me, it was very inspirational. I really like there's always a fire lit, like you said, within us, and that rekindling and reconnection is something that we always kind of want to do, subconsciously or consciously, and that just kind of brought it to the surface again for me, because we kind of lose momentum sometimes when we are doing things just among ourselves. And I feel like once we include more community, we continue to rekindle that flame constantly, so that we don't lose the fire within us. And especially now with a new president that's coming in, that can cause fear within a lot of people, potentially losing family, or, even losing lives. Who knows what could happen in this next year. But how important do you feel building community and building that strength of community, not only in Yanawana, known as San Antonio, but also across Texas, just it being the place that it is currently occupied, Mexico, that, how can we as community keep our ties strong so that that fear and potential loss doesn't affect us in the same way so that we can keep each other strong?
Yeah, I feel, it's very unfortunate that this post-colonial oppressive like system that we're forced to like live and operate under just really like strips us of our birthrights as indigenous people of this continent to be able to migrate, and for me, like it's very important, through the community work that we do, through the different spaces that, I get invited to be a part of, that, we really shift that narrative around migration, right? Of migration being like this thing that, is driven. I mean, it's obviously driven by like political and economic factors that force people to leave their homelands. Because, I mean, most people will not, don't want to leave their homelands, and also as indigenous people, like I feel like we're wired to migrate, like, I mean, migration has existed on this continent for thousands and thousands of years, from what I've learned, and one of the things that really helps me build community across, other indigenous tribal people that, are either still connected to their land or, to their languages, or have been displaced, from one region to another because of, broken treaties, or, just the imposition of these fake borders that exist now, is that, we've been exchanging, we've been intermarrying, we've been like connected, and there's always been like a like a flow of like, movement on the continent that is inherently part of a human's role in nature, right? Because we're like, we don't belong to nature, like we are nature ourselves, and those patterns have
Yeah.
always existed, like I really like nerd out on like all kinds of like stuff, but one of the things that like I nerd out on is like maps, and so some of the maps that I've come across, in through my exchange and interconnectedness and kinship building with other tribal people, superimposing the maps that show ancestral like migration routes, which for us in Tejas, like this was like a big like funnel, like here in this part of the continent, like a lot of those migration routes like kind of like come together in our region, so it really puts Texas in a historically and ancestrally in a very precarious like position, in the sense that yes, there are and there will always be people that are native to this region, and also there has also always been people that migrated through here and people that have been displaced here. So like the layers of colonization and harm that, colonial oppression and genocide has impacted in these lands is very violent, and it continues to be that way, and one of the things that I try to challenge myself, and part of it is the privilege of being able to migrate still, right? Because I have like quote unquote like the legal like documents needed to go back and forth between like the US and Mexico borders, right? Like walking with that acknowledgement that it's a privilege now, whereas before it was a birthright, for indigenous people to be able to walk these lands and exchange as they so felt necessary, and just be in good relation with each other as we were doing it, because I think that's the thing too, like like, of course there was like rivalries and things like that, but I'm sure that that was because there was some kind of conflict somewhere that people just didn't, and I'm sure it was probably a man's fault.
Right.
But
Like you say, it's a birthright. It's all made up. It's all imaginary. And what's real is, that, like you said, that we are migrating people, like the Hopi, their creation story about, reaching all the way from Canada to Peru and then coming back around in a spiral, with nature, and like the hieroglyph, the pictographs that they left all over the place, like that are still there in Sonora and Arizona, and like the impact that it made, not only on the building of Phoenix and like, most of Arizona, is all the irrigation system that exists there now was put there by the Hopi, people. And, it had they not migrated and learned, through community and things like that, then all these things wouldn't exist. I do feel like building community between like Houston, San Antonio, Austin, that understanding that we don't need to rely too heavily on the systems in place because they're not really there for us, that we can
yeah,
build a connection through our communities, like you said, and create a better foundation for our own people to heal and to pass on information to their children so that they can live a better life and not have that fear of, oh, what if these systems aren't there anymore? And it's like, now I think we're at a space as a community that where we can say we don't need it, fully. We can do this on our own with community and just helping each other along the way, But I know that you've done things like, movements and like DJing, hip hop dance and stuff like that with community members, younger community members and things like that. So how did you get into that, and kind of what kind of brought you there to that kind of movement and things like that, along with the teatro ritual that you created with other performance artists?
yeah. So I started. So actually, I did break dancing. So I mean, I have dabbled a little bit in DJing, and like I know how to scratch a little bit, but primarily like my participation in hip hop culture has been mostly breakdancing for the bulk of it. But I also did graffiti, and I did like emceeing. I still do like a little bit of emceeing here and there. Still write some raps every once in a while. But yeah, like I feel like it's a very interesting story, how I ended up, getting into hip hop culture. Yeah, so I was originally born in Mexico. I was born in Torreon, Coahuila, which is part of the Comarca Lagunera. And my family, raised me in Lerdo, Durango, which is where, my grandparents ended up moving to after they had met and had their first few kids in El Salto, which is like one of the land ties that I have to the Sierra as in our Tepehuan lineage on my dad's side of the family. But yeah, so when we moved to the United States is highly like documented, like this forced assimilation and acculturation of indigenous people, of Mexican people, of migrant people, where we're really like force fed like all of this narrative around like leaving our languages behind, our cultural identities behind, and things like that, and so I definitely received that messaging in schooling, right, which is always a vehicle for oppression, in some cases, like I mean, of course, education is always a force for expanding oneself, but in the way that it's been used here in the occupied territories that we live in now, like education has served as a vehicle of oppression, in its systemic design. To the point that, I even stopped doing matachin danza by the time that I was in middle school, even though I had been a part of it since I was a child. Um,
Yeah.
and in and
Hmm.
in that time, it was like the 80s, so like, um, like I'm aging myself right now. So hip hop culture was very much at the forefront, or starting to be at the forefront, and a lot of some of my cousins that lived in Austin, they were really into the graffiti scene, and they had this book called Subway Art, by Henry Chalfant, that's a hip hop classic now, and they had a pictures of like different graffiti writers, and one of the graffiti writers that really stuck out to me was Pink, because she was a girl, and so I started tagging, and so when I first started getting into hip hop, I tagged and I did graffiti, or tried to, and my brother was the one that got really into the breaking, like he was, I feel like we both probably have like undiagnosed ADHD. And so like, he just needed a lot of physical, like, and I think I did too, I mean, I've always been like more mental, but like the physical aspect of it, because I was a danzante, like traditionally, like gravitated towards the breakdancing and all of the different like popular dances of the 90s, like the Running Man and the Cabbage Patch and like all of that stuff, that was really popular in the 90s and stuff. And so I really felt like a sense of belonging in that, because it was a very multicultural space, primarily urban space. And even though we lived in a small town, like, there was still enough people like interested in hip hop culture to where, like it dominated, like our pop culture or folk art, right? Like our folklore like experience as migrants. So I feel like that kind of sparked like my interest in folk, like, folk arts, because I feel like hip hop is folk art, like it's a culture that came from migrants, from
Yeah.
Jamaica and different parts of like the islands, at a time where, economically, like in the 80s, during the Reagan era, like there was just a lot of like, um, just clear like lines being drawn between like the working class and like the ruling class, which is still alive now, but just in like different ways. And hip hop culture was one of those things that was a music of resiliency and resistance. So, I think just naturally I gravitated towards it, and it became my discipline, it became my avenue. Like, I started out doing like freestyle dance, which we were kind of getting into a debate the other day. We're just like, is it called freestyle or is it Latin hip hop? Because like, like there's just a lot of like just depending on what you search, like, different things come up, but things like, Little Susie, Stevie B, things like that were really popular for young people at the time. And I mean, I wasn't going to clubs or anything yet, but we would hear it, on the radio, because we were migrating to El Paso and Juarez, and different touch points along like my family's like migration history, that, we were getting access to radio stations from the West Coast that were, playing things like Pocos Pero Locos, and I'd make my little tapes, and like me and my brother would just dance. And once I was, out of high school and moved out on my own, I met a crew in Austin. And by that time I was doing a lot of house dancing, because I was, like as a teenager, like, sneaking into clubs and stuff. Like I would go to like these clubs, and I'd go to the gay clubs, and I was exposed to like house music and like techno. And I mean, I just love to dance, like, I mean, I never really was a type of person that would go
to the clubs to like drink or like party and stuff like that. Like I just always wanted to dance, and it became a discipline for me. Like once I was, out of my house and living on my own, and it was just part of like my day. Like I would train and just learn these different techniques and different foundational moves that are part of like the breakdancing culture, or like b-boy b-girl culture. And to this day I still throw down on a little bit of up rock here and there. And then once I got introduced to danza mexica, um, like I incorporated that into my dancing, which is really interesting too, because the very first time that I had like a touch point with like native, like quote unquote native folk outside of like my own family, was in New Mexico, and our breakdancing crew had gone down there to support an event that this b-boy promoter was doing called man, I forget what the name of the event was called, but it was it was a breakdancing event that he was doing with because he had a program with young people after school, and they were making a mural, and so they had breakdancing battles in their high school um, like gym, and he invited us to come out there to you know to to be a part of that. And some of my homies were like judges for the battles and stuff, because Texas established itself worldwide as kind of a pioneer in the breakdancing scene in the like 90s and like 2000s, right? Because um, the East Coast had like their basic like foundational like like classic like up rock and like all the like original moves of breaking, and then the West Coast kind of came in with more acrobatic like kind of just power moves and like popping and things like that. And then Texas, by the late 90s and early 2000s, was really pioneering like a mixture of both, that's considered power style. So it's just kind of like the way that we would talk about it be like Bruce Lee. It's like the style of no style. So
Yeah.
we would train in salsa, we would train in like capoeira, like different martial arts. We did weight training, and then we would do our drills for breaking. And yeah, it was just a really powerful time. And my first contact with like other indigenous communities was through hip hop, and it turned out that we were at the Gathering of Nations, which is one of the
Cool.
largest powwows of the Southwest. And I didn't even know it at the time, like we were just ciphering, we were just breakdancing with the breakdancers that were there at the powwow, that were also like powwow dancers, and then later on, I found out like, oh, okay, that was the Gathering of Nations, so my first contact with other indigenous folk from other tribes was as a breakdancer, which I think is pretty cool, and so, but for like over like 15 years, like my journey, which has led to teatro, Tlanesli, teatro ritual, has been this idea of wanting to like speak to our urban experience as indigenous people, right? And how like dance in particular, and the arts, through spoken word, through music making, through art making, as far as like painting and things like that,
Mm.
and dance, are all four elements that are like essential in hip hop culture, but they're also present in all cultures, like when you study like social anthropology and things like that, like were things that I was like, like synthesizing about like in like my educational path, as a scholar too, it's just like, all of every world culture has those four things, right? Like it's movement, some kind of movement, some kind of music, some kind of like art or like wall art, in particular, um, and um, and then some type of some type of like spoken word or like oral storytelling, right? And then of course the food, it's like I think the food is kind of like the fifth element. but
Mm-hmm.
those are those are vehicles that keep our cultures, that define culture and that keep our cultures alive, and so I made the connection when I first came in contact with Mexica Chichimeca danza in my late 20s, that, like, oh, like all of the feelings and the things that I would journal about and like would write rhymes about regarding my dance were things that were inherently a part of like my DNA, that my ancestors had codified for me in dance, and so I navigated for about 15 years trying to figure out like how can I respectfully honor my lineage as a B girl, and as um, as a traditional like dancer, in the Mexica, Chichimeca, like Anahuaca dances, um, and also like how can I make something new out of it, and it took a lot of talking to elders and seeing other people's work and some trials and errors too, because there was definitely times where I engaged with people where I thought like, oh, this is an artistic expression, and it just ended up being an exploitation, but Tlanesli Teatro Ritual is kind of an
Yeah.
attempt to bridge all of those movement disciplines, and it's a really exciting time for me with that because had kind of put it on the side burner for a little bit, but I feel like in the next 2 years, like I really like have sat with myself around like creating more like theatrical ritual, and um and just honoring like my own legacy as and lineage as an artist too, because in my journey of like reconnecting with the different family stories in my life. Like, I found out that my grandpa, when he moved from El Salto, Durango, to Durango City, that he was a maestro de ceremonias in Mexico, which are basically like announcers and like entertainers that uh, bring in different like actors and actresses and plays and things into communities, and so he was a really big part of establishing El Sindicato de Actores in Durango State, and in Durango City. Um, so I was just like, oh, like he was always part of
Oh,
the teatro himself, So, and I mean, like, oh, okay, that makes sense because he always had those little masks, like, the smile now, cry later, like little masks that kind of represent theater. Like he always had those around, and he drew them
yeah.
and things like that. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I get that. So when when like I was in my like getting introduced to Latin hip hop stuff, like I was like, oh, like that's a big part of like, our Chicano culture too, that whole concept of the duality of life, and how the arts are a part of that, and so it's really cool just to see how like, the things that you're into, like even when you don't know it, are something that your family lineages have done, or like your work is a continuation of theirs, and so I see that this is what Tlanesli Teatro Ritual is, which I will be, like presenting a work in progress in February, on the International Day of the Tongue, February 21st and 22nd, here in San Antonio. I'm in the process of, writing some new work and working with some different frameworks that I've learned as a cultural organizer and like just a narrative strategist and like movement work, but applying it to like the arts and specifically to like indigenous narratives, through movement and art and all that stuff. So make sure you come down.
Yeah, definitely. And that's beautiful that you like you were saying that it was already kind of in your DNA, the all these this art and performance and everything. And everything that you went through when you were younger, like going into breakdancing, learning about hip hop, kind of incorporating rock in there, and kind of all culminated into this, into Clanesi Teatro Ritual, which kind of perpetuates the understanding of our culture, of the indigenous culture, and perpetuating that beautiful, movement and overall passing on of culture is really beautiful that you do that. And if anybody is interested in like learning more about that, they can always go to this website and look at the videos, and especially on Vimeo, because they really they are a sight to see. They're so artistically beautiful, and the way everybody moves and stuff. It's almost like to me, it just felt magical, like watching them and the way it's edited so beautifully. It made it really resonate and get the message across to me specifically as I was watching it. It's something I definitely want to show to people, and so that they can see like the art of indigeneity is continuing to grow because of people like you that bring life into it, and all the people that you bring together, and help them express their art within themselves, and to the community. I think that's really awesome work that you do, because it's definitely not easy, like we're not rich people or anything like that are able to just do whatever project we want to do. It takes a lot of time and effort, especially bringing community together, with what you're working on in February. It's going to be another piece of the work that you do with movement and breath, and the undulation of the breath of life. I know that you do other things like you've done doula work and things like that, and healing work with the Corazón Circles. Is that something that you created yourself with other healers and artists that were wanting to make a space for people to heal and things like that?
Yeah, the Corazon Circles was kind of like a brainchild of myself and my sisters, like the Santibáñez sisters, who are like my longtime, like, like, I mean, sisters, like I consider them my family, like, I mean, we started out as comrades, and, just people in the movement of migration justice and environmental justice, indigenous rights, things like that. We were kind of like, contemporarily like walking alongside each other when our paths crossed, and we were, experiencing some of the same, like, I mean, I guess initially like we trauma bonded, like, but that, turned out to be like a very beautiful kinship that, is actually like the core and the basis of our community work as Calpulia Yolopaxin, right? So, we carry the palabras of the lineage of our danza, like work, but which is also, like grown into more of a calpuli, which is uh, multifaceted, right? Like danza is one part of it, which is the part that usually people see. So it's a little bit misunderstood sometimes and highly criticized because of people's just lack of understanding of like the history of danza, like the way the tradition gets passed down, and the way that it inherently like promotes like in this iteration now, like the retribalization of people that have lost connection to either their indigenous like lands and languages, or that have that intact but are outside of their out of their regions, and so they're looking for community to build, and earlier you asked about like the role of community in that, and it's just such a big part of like how we indigenize the way we walk in as modern people, right? And this is why I feel that the millenary like knowledge contributions and thought leadership of our indigenous ancestors is still relevant in a modern world, and our role is, yes, to preserve the traditional aspects of it, and also give ourselves the space and build the types of kinships needed to where you can also like live within the time that you're in, right? So it's not this archaic expression that can only live in this hyper patriarchal, like misogynist, you know, like transphobic, queer phobic, like homophobic, um, way that it had to adapt to, right? Because I mean, even in things like the Native American church, or like the way that, the Confederation of different like national, like federally recognized tribes have had to organize themselves in order to maintain relevance in the federal like government. They've also, like their matriarchal and like queer identities of like a lot of our indigenous like communities has been genocided culturally too, and physically, right? Because we know that like indigenous like queer folk like don't have safe spaces, and so that was a big part of like the formation of our kalpuli, and advocacy of like, you know like I mean, there's things that I'm just like, man, I really need to document this, right? Because there was a time in my like life where, I wasn't even allowed to play the drum or play the conch shell, and I had to, you know, sit down with elders and just be like, well, what are we supposed to do when we don't have any men around us that we feel safe around, And so we have to take on these masculine roles. And also, like, I have
Mm-hmm.
very masculine energy, I mean, I present myself like hella femme, and like, very matriarchal, like guess in like the aesthetics, but like my energy is really masculine, and so as a queer person myself, and like, two spirit, like non-binary, like, we have all this language to express ourselves now, but essentially, it's like we all have that fluidity to express ourselves within like a non-binary like manifestation, and that can change from day to day, like, and it should, for all genders, but because of patriarchy, we don't allow ourselves to. But from that work that we've done as matriarchs in the Kalpuli, we got to this point where we were just like, man, we want to make more offerings to our community. And we also have had these situations where we're just like, not everybody's ready to like be like a hardcore, like, full body plunge, into it. And it takes time to get people to go through their own process of rekindling, like, their own family lineages, and their own land ties, and their own healing and deprogramming, right? Because we also have to deprogram a lot of ourselves, and the things that we've learned from colonization, especially as, Chicanos, or people that identify as Chicanos or Latinos when they first come in contact with it, right? Um, and so in that, we were just like, maybe not everybody's going to be ready to be a danzante or to be going to sweat lodges or something, so we're like, what component of like our work is shareable, like multiculturally, and like, to all people, like intergenerationally, intertribally. And we found and really got centered in the way that we were keeping our circles, right? Like we were doing circle keeping, and we had elders and maestros ahead of ourselves, of like, folks from La Cultura Cura, like Jerry Teo, and from Shinashli, uh, uh, the National Chinashli Comadres Network, with Sara Husky Mendoza, who really, taught us and put time into us to teach us the art of circle keeping and of rites of passage through cultura, and we were all educators already. We were working with young people. Um, like, I mean, I've been working with young people for almost like 30 years, and have led several programs, like hip hop, indigenous, like I helped found like the Indigenous Cultures Indigenous arts encounter that they do every year. Like I was the first like youth program director there, and so really foundational part of like creating a youth program there, and with like folks like Martinez Street Women's Center, where we did like a more multicultural like approach to learning through cultura and social justice. Like we use social justice frameworks. So that was a lot of the expertise that we were gathering as individuals and a collective, and we decided to make that like our offering, through the Corazón Circles. And then Red Rojas joined our team, who's an amazing artist and has been a key part of like bringing to life, like through art, like the ideas and the concepts of our group. And we work on all kinds of different projects. It's very diverse, from like translation and language access work to birth justice work. Like right now, our Le Corazon team was able to be engaged in a birth justice project with UTSN, the Mellon Foundation. So we're going to be launching alongside, some other consulting firms that were part of the project team there. But we did some community storytelling, which was facilitated through the circle keeping. So, and just sharing the narratives of Black and Brown Indigenous folks that have encountered obstetric violence due to racism, classism, and all of the things, and hoping that that storytelling and collective art making project helps create advocacy for birth justice policy in Texas, which is really going to be needed, in these coming years. And so yeah, so I think like right now, like the work that I've done, like that's why I like kind of coined it like a rites of passage doula, right? Because I mean, it's not just a doula as in like doing birth work, but it's just like I feel like where I'm placed at, like through whether it's through art, whether it's through like social justice, whether it's as a facilitator, a trainer, or like a thought partner. Like I feel like a lot of what my experience and the teachings that I've been able to learn, like and share, like it just have placed me in a way that my role and the things that people in my community come to me for is to walk alongside them in in getting to that next phase of like either the work or their personal development or their growth, and it also helps me grow, as well. So it's always like an exchange, like which is another part of like the expertise that we bring through the Corazon Circles, is that a lot of our through the Círculo, it's always participatory, and we're honoring the knowledge in the room, right? Because like our pedagogy has always been influenced or like grounded in Paulo Freire's work of, pedagogy of the oppressed, where it's like, we all know something, and together we know what we need, and so that's a big part of like like my work as a researcher, and like a practitioner, and it's just, like, and even that, like I'm using in my frameworks for doing art, where it's just like this group that we're going to be launching for Mother Tongue, like will be, part of like it's an experiment really, because it's like an experiment of like all of our gifts and talents and these frameworks that I've learned as a community organizer, as a cultural organizer, and applying them to art making that elevates different types of multicultural voices too, because I've gotten criticized of just like, oh, you center y'all's culture too much, or y'all take up too much space, like as danzantes and stuff like that, and it's just like, well, let me show you like another side that you don't get to see, so that if people have questions, they can just like come up and ask, because yeah, I mean, yes, I understand like it's very visual and it takes up a lot of like visual like space. So like a lot of times people just narrow it down to like a very superficial like understanding of what you do, you know, and I feel like sometimes it's really hard to capture like the full breadth of what, you know, I do as like an individual and like the people around me do as like a collective. But, you know, we've really worked hard to build accountable, just really beautiful kinships around ourselves and try to, you know, by example, build those ecosystems that are possible when we just give each other the space to show up as our authentic and full selves, you know, walk that line and walk that path with like love and care and a radical sense of belonging, right? Which means that we have to be able to walk through conflict in ways that it's generative and a lot of those practices we have, you know, as practitioners of transformative justice and you know at the end of the day it's inspired by indigenous knowledge, you know, of like, you know, you don't dispose of your people, you know. So, you know, it's a beautiful place to be at. And I feel it's a place that a lot more people are willing to explore because of the political climate, right? And this idea of like, we have to rely on each other. We have to build the systems that work for us. And for me, like, you know, doing this work through the Corazón Circles and our own internal work of healing, you know, is part of that responsibility that we have to be able to show up as our best selves for ourselves and for each other. And so, you know, I just hold the spaces to help facilitate that word, whether it's, you know, on a one-on-one basis, you know, if it's through the healing modalities that I've learned, like, you know, for, you know, for like the rebozo or like sobadas or limpias, or if it's like more of like the groupal kind of thing where it's like, we're actually training people like on rites of passage curriculum or you know we're training people how to facilitate circles in their communities or in their work, you know, which you know spans from like education to like you know social work, community health work, you know, holding space for like heal the healer kind of things, you know, where it's just like when you're a community health worker for the, you know, for the city or for, you know, other people, like where do you go to get taken care of, you know? So it has a very like expansive breadth, but it seems like a lot, but it's really all the same thing, just being applied to different like, you know, different spaces, which is the círculo, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And that's really important. Those circles that exist and the space that you guys create for people to allow themselves to heal or to find the healing or that they are looking for within themselves, you know, facilitating it for themselves. And also just having a safe space so that people feel comfortable. And I think that's really awesome that you guys are doing that work because it is definitely very difficult. You know, you don't always get pushback when you're trying to take up space, and which is, you know, we all have that right to take up space and create art and you know, do all these things that we need to do for our community to be better. You know, and some people they want to stand in the way of that or they don't understand it, which is okay. It's part of the process, but the fact that you guys continue on with that work is amazing to me. I love it. That's really awesome. But do you have any, or do you know any people or organizations that you've seen in San Antonio or in Austin that you would recommend for people who are trying to reconnect and fan the flame within themselves of connecting back to their indigeneity?
Yeah, you know, there's several of you know, veteran organizations that were very essential for me in my journey when I first, you know, was making that connection. And I would say, you know, in Austin, Resistencia Bookstore, you know, Red Salmon Arts is like the hub. You know, like I think everybody has to have some kind of point touch point with that organization just because of the longevity of their work, the veteran status of like everybody that's been involved in keeping that vision of Raul Salinas presente, you know, like his legacy and just his vision for having the bookstore be a hub for people to breed like comradeship. Like it was definitely one of the places that radicalized me. And, like another place in Austin that I feel is important is like the Emma S. Barrientos Cultural Center, the MAC. And I know that they've expanded a lot since I've been there, because I mean I haven't been in Austin since 2011 as a resident. Like I lived there for 16 years of my life, and so a big part of my journey was there. But when I moved to here to San Antonio, like one of the key like touch points for me coming from Austin, even before I moved here, was the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, Fuerza Unida, who are some movement elders that I highly respect and feel that people need to know about their work. Then, I mean, a lot of people do work with the American Indians of Texas, the Indigenous Cultures Institute in San Marcos. But like there's a lot more calpulis now too, like in Austin and here in San Antonio and even in San Marcos now, like a lot of the folks that were like my contemporaries, like coming up, where we were just like the soldados, like the warriors back then, like we're, getting up there in age now. So we're, in these positions of like leadership now. And so there's like, younger people coming along and learning from that as well. So, just researching some of like the local Kalpultin, the Karankawa tribe, is very active in Austin and in Corpus, and just the region, in regards to environmental like work. And Chiara, that does a lot of the art making through collaging, is an important person to connect with, especially for folks that are of trying to connect or have inclinations to knowing that their tribal ties are of this land, that they're not necessarily migratory like indigenous people, or if they did migrate, it was just like this region. The different Coahuilteco tribes, especially like the Xocna Carrizo Come Crudo tribe is, somebody that all indigenous communities in this area should be like supporting, because they're really at the forefront of protecting like sacred sites and the like I mean I would say that it's probably one of the most violent forms of extraction that we're experiencing in like occupied Texas, right? With the building of like SpaceX and the LNGs on the coast, of Boca Chica and like Corpus
Yeah.
and stuff. So, I really, really try to utilize whatever exposure that we get, especially since we're more of a migratory intertribal community, to turn
Hmm.
some eyes onto those political struggles of like the cultural and like historical genocide of the native folks of Somisec, like the Carrizo Come Crudo, who fight really hard, like worldwide, to protect their sovereignty and just really highly respected community that I'm, really fortunate to have, like a relationship with. And it doesn't mean that we always get along too, because all the people that I mentioned, like a lot of people don't get along with each other, unfortunately. But everybody's work is important, so we should always be supporting, like no, regardless of,
Yeah.
whether personally like we get along, like the purpose of folks is important, and those their struggles.
Yeah, I know the Somisec have done a lot of work. Like you were saying with SpaceX, building everything and pretty much like destroying the land. They've been there videotaping. I've seen videos of them showing people what it's, how it's damaging the earth and the area. Not only that, but also like burial grounds and things like that. And I know that they, like you say, they've gone all around the world, like in France, to try and fight the the pipeline that was coming from Canada all the way down here to Texas. So I know I've seen them do a lot of work pertaining to that, and they continue to do it. Whether or not people support them or not, they continue that work, and it's definitely somebody. It's a community that we should support. Just because even if we don't always agree, like you said, it's always important to stay connected as a community and understand that it's for the greater good. We look past anything that we might have between us to grow and expand so that we can continue to fight this fight that we're all fighting together. Like
Yeah.
it's just something that's necessary, I think. But I really appreciate just all the work that you do, and connecting with communities and making sure that it's passed on to the younger folks, and that you continue showing people and creating, taking up space as you guys do. I really appreciate that altogether, and just the advice that you've given, the information that you've shared with us is really important. And I really urge people to like go out and read the essays that you wrote, because they really do, I feel, are going to help people see what kind of work that you're doing and the importance of it, and also seeing how they can connect it to their own lives and the way that they are growing, healing, if that's what we're trying to do. But I definitely appreciate everything that you've shared with us today, and I hope that you can continue the work that you're doing, and hopefully I can help spread some information on these things that are happening, these organizations that are in San Antonio and Austin, and connect people so that we can all create a stronger bond and community. But I definitely appreciate you interviewing with us today, and just sharing this information.
Yeah, no, thank you, Adriana. Thanks,
Yeah, and
so much for making this space for us to connect and share this work. I think, in like a closing thought is just like just being in right relation with each other. Like we don't have to be like organizing every little aspect of all of our work together, but it's like when we do intersect as communities, and as we continue to build, our own infrastructures for resiliency going into the future, is that, we just do the work while, maintaining, being in right relationship with each other throughout, and I feel like that, that can help us get through a lot of the challenges of like, different like ideological like differences or experiences maybe, because there has been a lot of that in the history of like, indigenous communities in this region. So it's a very like like peculiar dynamic, but at the same time it's just like, we all need each other, and regardless if we're doing the same work in the same
definitely.
areas, like we, supporting each other's important, and being in good relationships with each other. We have our ceremonia in March. March 14th and 15th is our Mexican New Year ceremony. We'll have some rites of passage, rituals for our young people that are turning 13, and different people receiving their names, so the people will be able to witness, some of the ritual parts of our work there, and then the theatrical stuff in February. In And I'll send you more information, as we get all of that like public, so that you can share it on your platforms and stuff too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I definitely hope that I can, we can meet in person one day, and we can, continue the work of, connecting communities between here and there. And I definitely hope that people take these important uh, organizations, and they are able to find a deeper healer within themselves through community. So thank you again, Laura, so much for this interview.
Thank you, Adriana. Have a good one. La sukamati.